Hello, it's Mark McDonald with First United Methodist Church of Batesville. We're on week 9, day 2. We're going straight from day 1 into day 2. Both of these days are about obedience. And it really strikes me because this week in one of the worship services that I follow on Sundays now, maybe you're like me, we watch not only our own service, but we check out some others. I always watch my brothers. I watch a few other services from time to time. I heard a quote on one of them that I thought was absolutely extraordinary. And I want to share it with you today because I think it leads us in to today's workbook lesson. And it's simply this: we cannot break the law of God. That's it. We cannot break the law of God. And I know what you're thinking is the first thing I was thinking. There is actually a second part, a part B to this statement, another sentence that can go with it. But you're thinking, we break God's laws all the time, but it says we cannot break the law of God. Here's the part B. We can only break ourselves against it. We can't break God's laws. We can only break ourselves against those laws. Isn't that amazing? Today we're talking about obedience in a different section, like we talked about yesterday, but we're talking about, and the phrase that was used in the workbook in the side column is obedience means joy and uninterrupted fellowship with God. Obedience is joy and uninterrupted fellowship with God. Clearly, a lot of times when we think of obedience, we think of judgment. We think that being disobedient is costly, and it is. It actually says that in the workbook today too, that it's costly because what we think of is hell, damnation, punishment, that when you're disobedient, you're punished. But here's the twist in today. Our concept of disobedient goes to those dark kind of judgmental things. But if obedience is a call to joy and uninterrupted fellowship with God, the worst possible consequence of disobedience is missing that deeper, more intimate relationship with God. So the costliness of disobedience, the cost of not being obedient, is not punitive. It's the loss of the opportunity you have for more of what is truly good. As we look at the seventh reality and we start to realize that we are called to have an experience with God, we grow in our experience with God, and that's when we start to know that God works through us, that we miss the opportunity to walk closer with God, to know how God is working, to know and do the will of God when we're disobedient. So obedience is not a judgment, it's an invitation to real life. As you read through and work through the workbook today, think of it. Try to change that approach that we normally think about when we use the word obedience. That lack of obedience, we're going to regret missing the chance to walk close with God. And obedience is an invitation to walk even closer. I hope you enjoy the workbook today, and I hope that you can walk even closer with God and be a blessing to others. Hello, everybody. It's Mark McDonald with First United Methodist Church of Batesville again, here to share with you in our daily devotional as we continue our walk through experiencing God, knowing and doing the will of God. This workbook that we've been following for the last 8 weeks continues this week in the 9th week. There are 12 total, so we're getting closer to the end. And today we move into a week of obedience. And these first 2 days that I'm going to share back to back right now are about the word obedience specifically. There's a part 1 today on day 1 and a part 2 tomorrow on day 2. And so as we look at these, we are focusing on the 7th reality of the realities that we've been following. Today in the workbook, you're going to have a chance to go through these and see if you can recall them off the top of your head. So take a look at this drawing for a moment and look at that. These are the 7 realities. God is always at work around you. God pursues a continuing love relationship with you that is real and personal. God invites you to become involved with Him in His work. God speaks by the Holy Spirit through the Bible, prayer, circumstances, and the church to reveal God's self, His purposes, and His ways. God's invitation for you to work with God always leads to a crisis of belief that requires faith and action. Number 6, you must make major adjustments in your life to join God in what God is doing. And lastly, and what we will focus on this week as we begin our work, you come to know God by experience as you obey God, and God accomplishes God's work through you. So of these 7 realities, we've come to that. Today, it strikes me that one of the phrases in the workbook may jump out at you about how obedience is an outward expression of your relationship with God. When I do weddings in the United Methodist Church, one of my favorite parts of the wedding is when we present the wedding ring that we have. And one of the things that comes in our liturgy is that we say the wedding ring is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Does it represent the love between the couple? Of course, but it represents a deeper love of God. The wedding ring has that circle, that's that eternal love that starts before us, goes after us. And so that is what we're asking for God to bless in that wedding relationship and that marriage that we have. When 2 people come together in that love, they're asking for God's eternal love to be part of our everlasting love. And so as you begin the study today, I want you to think about what this offers. Really, there are 3 questions that the workbook challenges us to realize what obedience does, because it is the outward expression of our relationship with God. First, it says, will you follow God? Will you follow in Jesus' footsteps? Secondly, it says, will you experience God's work through you? And lastly, will you grow even closer to God? So as we begin with that word obedience, that can be a weighty word, but it is an invitation into something that draws us even closer and more in love with our God. Enjoy the workbook today and be a blessing in all that you do.